Welcome to Insights as a Service, the podcast that helps MSPs get ahead. And this week we are doing that by speaking to Paul O'Dwyer, a man who has helped a number of businesses get ahead through the use of the scaling up framework, through coaching individual staff. He's also a man who just knows a lot about the tech sector in both Australia and New Zealand, has great insights into what makes a successful business, and has personally helped me do a lot better in my own role with Lightwire through the coaching he's done with us. So just in case I'm not doing that justice, Paul, how about you give us your version of who you are and your background?
Well, thanks, Brendan. Great to be here. Who I am? Well, I suppose I'm an accidental entrepreneur. Coming to Australia from Ireland as a backpacker over 30 years ago and falling into business. And I suppose what I do nowadays is really help founders and entrepreneurs and business leaders grow their businesses. And it's been a fun journey. Great to be here.
I know in my own experience, I can vouch for the effectiveness of the assistance you give businesses, because Lightwire got you on board a couple of years ago. I've probably already told a few stories on this podcast that involve you, that have referenced you. We're a very different business before you came on board and started working with us. I think I was a very different operator before I started working with you on a one-on-one level. So I can certainly provide testament to the effectiveness of the framework you work to and the expertise you've got. But I'll probably come back to that a little bit later on. But most of the time, as far as I know, you run a business called 20 Mile March. Why don't we start by talking about that title, what it means, where it comes from, and kick off from there?
Yeah, look, 20 Mile March came about. The title, first of all, came from a Jim Collins book. And Jim Collins, the business management guru, had written about the race between Amundsen and Scott to the Antarctic. And he talked about a lot of aspects of it, but essentially what the fundamental was, the reason why Amundsen mainly got to the South Pole before Scott did was because him and his team were disciplined in walking X number of miles a day. He rounded it out to 20 miles a day. So no matter whether the weather was good, the weather was bad, they would have the discipline, and they got to the South Pole and back long before Scott did, and in fact got there and back safely.
That's
Scott, on the
important.
other hand, yeah, absolutely. And Scott, on the other hand, he decided that when the days were good, he would do 30 miles, and days are bad, they would do only a few. If they were tired, they wouldn't do any. If the weather was bad, they wouldn't continue. And consequently, they got into a lot of trouble, a lot of other factors, but they got into a lot of trouble. And I suppose this resonated me around teams and business outcomes, because the teams that are successful are consistent in an output that they aim for all the time, regardless of market conditions, regardless of how good it is or whatever tailwinds they might have. They stay disciplined, because businesses can have a tailwind and actually grow too quickly and tire themselves out. So really this appealed to me, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to help businesses get that cadence, that rhythm of growth that is consistent and deliverable and measurable, doesn't burn people out, but really gives them something to aim for.
And I guess, yeah, so you beat me to it there with it not just being a minimum limit, but an upper limit as well.
Yep.
How do businesses work to understand what that limit should be? Like, what process do they have to go through to really understand what's both realistic but not underselling themselves?
Good question. Look, there's probably two aspects. One is, if there's a leader in the business, a founder, owner of the business, ideally it comes from them, because they want to set a cap on what a good life is going to look like for them. And, I think many entrepreneurs start out with, they go, just make it as big as I possibly can and go as hard. And they often start businesses for the reasons of growth and having a better life of some sort, but don't achieve it because the business gets out of control and, is too much to handle. So one is, maybe the founder doesn't need the upper limit doesn't necessarily even need to be monetary or output based. It could be time. It might say, I'm actually going to limit the amount of time I work within my business to 40 hours a week. So I have a balance and I have a family or X amount earnings, and that becomes a limiter. On the flip side, if you're working within a business or you're a professional CEO working for a board or a group of shareholders, really you're looking at the long haul. Companies have got too ambitious short-term aims and they underestimate the achievements over the long term. You're looking for compound growth. 40% growth one year, a drop of 20% the year after, all that means you're probably going to go nowhere. But if you consistently deliver 20 to 40% year on year after year, you're going to double in size every 2 to 4 years. And that done consistently means it's much more sustainable. And think about it. If you put a limit on the top, you then know how many resources you need in advance. If we're going to do this revenue, we're going to need these many engineers or this amount of product or whatever it might be. When you have a limiting factor, you can manage your business much easier, much better.
Yeah, just thinking too about when, as an owner, particularly for the businesses that we work with and the ones probably listening to this podcast where they've got probably less than 100 staff on average, thereabouts. There's a founder or founders working in the business. In them, as part of them trying to understand what they want out of this business, I think the purpose probably comes into it a lot. And also, I guess in terms of getting the right people to join the business and getting them excited about that whole piece. I should remember this, I don't, but you told me what 20 Mile March's purpose statement was, and it was so succinct and I guess meaningful. Can you run me through that again as an example of a good purpose statement?
Yeah, well, look, there's two parts to it, I suppose. The reason why I do what I do is because I've had my own business over the years, and about 20 years ago, I had one business that outgrew me quite quickly, and it became quite stressful. Hired the wrong people. My overdraft went through the roof. Looking at losing my house, all of those terrible things that entrepreneurs find out the hard way can go wrong. And I swore at that time that if I ever had the chance to help anybody in the future not go through that process, I would do it. That's why I do why I do what I do is I want leaders and teams not to have to learn the really hard way. They certainly need to learn by mistake, but not the ultimate way. But I aimed deliberately to help a certain type of person, which is a founder, operators of tech firms between 5 and 100 million in revenue. And that is my absolute core persona. So the why I do what I do and who I do what I do to really, really come together. And that's what 20 Mile March is about.
Nice. Yeah, I think you've certainly helped us with that as well. Using the power of connection to make people's lives better essentially is what we're about at Lightwire. But there's been a big movement in that space. I actually came across a business the other day called Little Phil, which stands for Little Philanthropy, and it's basically a tool that gives the power of giving to the employees in a company, where they can essentially, if they're allocated money. Have you come across them before yourself?
No, I haven't. No. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, basically it's, and again, someone from Little Phil might want to correct me here, and Matt and their marketing team will probably get on to me, but and we're just in our early stage of chatting to them ourselves. But the platform essentially says if a company is saying we're prepared to give XYZ amount of dollars to a charity this year, we break that up to the individuals in the business. They can choose what's important to them. We can either give them options, or they can just have a wide, complete, open slather as to what they choose from the institutions or the organizations that Little Phil works with. And that, helps drive meaning for the people working for the business. They know that as part of their engagement in their role, they also get to give to charities that really mean something to them. So that's just one example. I raised that because it's about how business owners and managers can create meaning in work. In your experience, when people are looking to make sure that they can hit those 20 Mile March targets, get to where they want to be consistently, it all starts with getting the right people on the bus, and we'll get to the whole framework soon around that. But how have you seen people effectively make sure they've got the right people in the team that are incentivized, aligned with the purpose, and are going to get them where they want to get?
Yeah, look, it is initially when you start a business, it's very difficult because you tend to go to your own network and connections. And hiring mates is not a strategy to grow a business. It tends not to work out. The reasons why you're friends or you have a mate or someone you know is for reasons other than the work that they can do. And, so I wouldn't recommend that. But what I would work out very early on is that just like you market for customers, you've got to market for employees. It's the same process. Your customer comes to you because you appeal in a certain way. They align with your values. Your product is right for their fit. And so when you're describing the work that you have and what you do, it has to be true and accurate. One of the big things that companies try and work towards nowadays is having a purpose statement, a why you work for, what we do. But it's invented in many cases. It's actually not true. And I don't think you can do that. I genuinely went through the hardships of growing a business. I felt the pain of it, and I empathize with that situation. And I don't think businesses need to invent something to attract an employee. They need to state it as it is. And I think we're definitely moving towards where we're trying to do good where possible. And things like philanthropy and giving back and using, company time resources to give back and allow employees to do it is a good thing. But it shouldn't be the basis of attracting people. The reason why people work is because, besides earning a living, is because they enjoy most of what they do. So describing accurately what the job actually is and playing to their strengths. And Brendan, we've discussed strengths over the years, is that and I use a strengths finder model a lot. A strength is something that you're good at and gives you energy. A weakness is something you're good at that might not give you energy. And so ideally, a business to attract the best people describes accurately the role to be done, that people can recognize their strengths. So when they get in, they'll actually love the job itself and do it really well. And all the other stuff helps, of course, but it needs to be true and accurate.
Do you find that whole piece has changed with different generations? That as they come into the workforce, there's different drivers, different ideas of what a job should or shouldn't be?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A great book I read a couple of years back is Why Your Adult Kids Disappoint You. I have adult kids and kids on, you don't disappoint me out there. But what it said is that, previous generations, and I'm a bit older than you, Brendan.
What?
And my generation, basically, there was no such thing as go out and find your purpose, Paul. Go and get a job that you love. It was get out the door, just find work, get on with it. And it was
get
really,
out of my house.
and yeah, that's it. Get out of my house, get working. And what that meant was you tried lots of different things and then you found something you liked and then you doubled down on that and that took you on your path. And nowadays, I think there's a heavy emphasis on finding your purpose first. Let's find what it is. So it makes it really hard for people coming into the workforce or younger, people changing, is deciding what to do. They're going, no, it's not the perfect job, so I can't do this, I can't do that. And I'd really encourage, again, if there's young techies out there, or salespeople or whatever for your audience, is go out and try lots of different jobs. Give it a go. Try different roles within the same company. Find out what you're good at and you like to do, and then you can move into there. And I don't think we do enough. I don't even encourage enough of that. We try and get it too perfect first, create too strong a purpose or too linear a path for a career, and I think we need to change that.
Does some of that come down to that judgment when someone's CV has a bit of chopping and changing? Maybe they're not in a role that long, they go to another?
Yeah, look, it can be. And certainly you be cautious on someone who changes the role on a regular basis. But where that's cautious is in doing the same type of work for different organizations. Okay, that's where the caution is, not doing different types of work in the same organization or different types of work in different organizations. Because again, typically, if you look at salespeople, if someone's got 18 months or less in a role, you'd be going, there's something wrong there. And typically it's so they get past their first year where they haven't hit their numbers, they're given a bit of an extra go to get there, and then they realize it and they're on to their next gig. 3 years on average is good to see people in roles. I'm not saying that if you've been in 10 years in a role, that's a bad thing, but you want to see some sort of longevity there. But I I used to love hiring people with diverse backgrounds, with interesting stories, life stories. But you make sure that you interview them properly and see the way they behave on the job. And often in interviews, we just don't dig deeply enough into how people's behaviors are. We sort of take them on face value. A resume or a CV is a starting point. Their career is a starting point, but you need to know how are they actually going to work and operate when they're, bum is in the seat in the job.
Yeah. I think even just going slightly off the question list here I've got for you, but I remember you telling me about the way to interview a candidate and the questions to ask and how you frame it. And I'm probably not doing it justice here, but the whole, what was the name of the person who was your manager in your last role? Great. Okay. It was, Mary. Okay, great. So if Mary was here now, what would she say the last conversation was with you where, perhaps you guys disagreed on something, and kind of drilling into that, almost making that third person real. And I've used that several times since. It's been a really interesting way of getting them to open up and, I don't know. Is there a better way of describing that than I just did? Probably.
Oh, no, look, no, that's great, man. I mean, the thing is that when we ask questions of people in interviews or any situations, even in sales, and we ask them direct questions. So I might say to you, Brendan, tell me what your strengths are. And you'll say, I'm great at, podcasting and hosting these events and so on.
Wouldn't be true,
right?
but cheers.
And I really haven't gained anything by knowing that. I've just got your opinion on what you think you're good at, which could be completely wrong or it could be right. I don't know. But when you ask in the third person, I would ask you, tell me who you worked for last. You'd say, I worked for Mary. And I say, Brendan, when I ask her, what your strengths are in podcasting, what will she tell me? Now, you'll give me an answer. That'll either be right or wrong. And she'll say I was great at them, or, I needed to practice or whatever. But I can then use that for two things. One is, I can use it for reference checking when I ring Mary. So I can ring Mary and say, look, when I spoke to Brendan, he said he was good at podcasting. So is that true? Yes or no? I've let her off the hook in the process. If she says no, he's not good at podcasting, even if he said, I know straight away that you've probably got no self-awareness. And so you're going to be hard to give feedback to in the course of your job. You're not going to get there. And the second thing is that, but in masking it that way, I'm implying that I'm probably going to call Mary. You're more likely to tell me the truth as to what it actually is, and think about it in that way. So I think, to me, anything in business is about learning a process. The less we use our gut to go and do what we believe works, because we're great at whatever we've been running this business for years. I know how to hire. My gut tells me. If we start to do that, that's where we make mistakes. We can't train anybody else based on our gut. But if we can follow processes and learn techniques like that to make our business better and make less mistakes, we're much better for it.
Now you're probably going down that whole checklist manifesto kind of vibe where it's, have the same process, repeat, which is another thing you always tell me. Let's talk. That probably leads nicely onto the whole framework that you work with, scaling up. What can you tell us about that at a high level? And then maybe let's jump into some specifics within it.
Look, scaling up, I came across about in its original form 20 years ago, actually, called The Rockefeller Habits. And it was written by a US-based author called Vern Harnish. And Vern had been in the entrepreneurial community for a long time. He'd set up a number of global entrepreneur organizations. He'd been at MIT running the Birthing of Giants program and so on. He wrote this book. And that difficult time I told you about, Brendan, earlier, where the business wasn't going well and I was really, it went through the throes of thinking my business was going to go bust and all that sort of stuff. I came across The Rockefeller Habits, the precursor to scaling up, and I read it cover to cover over a weekend. I attended one of Vern's seminars. I came back, I implemented it. And in 2 years, I'd completely turned the business around and sold top of market to a public company. And it was instituting the Rockefeller Habits that did it. It got me on the path. And so part of when I finished my earnout in that company at that time, I decided I would go back and help others by implementing the model. And about 4 or 5 years ago, Vern updated, based on the coaches telling him, updated the Rockefeller Habits to the scaling up book as it is today, and the scaling up process. Now, essentially what it is an open source of the best thinking globally from business leaders. So we would use Pat Lencioni, who you might know from the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and others. We would use Pat's model around the 5 dysfunctions. We would use Jim Collins' work. We would use, 70 or 80 different thought leaders. And we take that and we put it in place. And it means that it is constantly evolving. It doesn't stay the same. Apart from the underlying disciplines around things like priorities and setting up the operational infrastructure needed to drive your business. And that doesn't change, but the content changes. So look, it's a very powerful model, and it's worked for, I think now there's 80,000 businesses worldwide that use it, including Atlassian. Atlassian, Scott Farquhar from Atlassian was one of the early people that turned up to Verne seminars and took it back into Atlassian. And I know a lot of the things they use today, but there's many other companies, you'd be surprised, that are well-known brands that are scaling up advocates.
Yeah, no, for us at Lightwire, when we engaged with you, things were going pretty well, but I think there was a real sense that inefficiencies were creeping in as we scaled, that there was some confusion around roles and responsibilities. The purpose didn't really align. BHAG wasn't a thing we'd sort of pin down. And strategy really wasn't an understood focus. We didn't quite know in real terms what it meant and how to drive it. I think we're a very different business now, but for you, what needs to be ascertained, or what needs to be in place before a business can really take advantage of that framework?
Often the basics aren't in place, and when I come into a business new and I'm chatting to the owner or the founder, CEO, and the team and the rest, you find there's lots of gaps, and what they're looking for is something fancy to implement, and they go, what we need is a great USP or whatever they decide they need, and really when you look at it, they don't have the fundamentals in place, and that might mean just simply a list of priorities that they need to work on and keep in view all the time, the metrics to know that their business is on track, and maybe clarity around people's roles. That's often a biggie. People, because a business grows a little bit organically, often the founder they were never a business leader before. They were good at doing something. They were a technician, or maybe they had a different path to starting a business. So they've had to learn a lot on the job. So a lot of the fundamentals are not in place. So I'd say, and it doesn't take a lot of time, but, maybe 1 or 2 quarters of fixing up the fundamentals on there. And the analogy I use, as you've heard before, Brendan, is, if you're driving a car and the petrol gauge is broken, you're going to be a little bit paranoid about running out of fuel. You're probably going to stop too many times. You're going to check, that you've got enough and do calculations, the rest. And businesses run like that. They don't have the information they need to know that something is going the right way. So they start to micromanage. They start to ask questions of people, which puts them under pressure. And they didn't need to do it if they had a metric showing that was actually okay. And that helps the employee too, or the person doing the work, because they can see they're on track. The boss can see they're on track, the team. No one worried, they can get on. And if it's off track, everybody can lend a hand to get that back on track together. So I'd say, Bren, the main thing is start with the fundamentals. Get them fixed first, the few basic things. Then you can start to innovate or try new things and get on to really making your growth happen.
And I think getting those fundamentals, particularly the metrics in place, drives a cultural change as well, where as much a cliche as data-driven sort of starts to feel. We had a discussion today internally where head of rural, Mike, great guy, he was basically saying they want to try to allocate some resource towards fault resolution 24/7 as opposed to having installers do it. I said, great, what metric are we going to use to define success on that front? He said, well, time to fix the fault. I'm like, that's great, but do we actually currently capture the data that tells us the time to resolve a fault from the time it's allocated to someone in the field to go fix? If we don't retrospectively, how do we know if that's improving? And so we had a conversation around that. So we probably wouldn't have had that conversation before we got all the other metrics in play, before we started to understand what could be driven from those insights. So it's certainly when I think you start the scaling up journey, I don't think you can see what's coming at you, but it just keeps building and building and driving better conversations.
Absolutely. And you need to, you're right in questioning, what metrics you use, because I think the other aspect too is people believe something to be true and run with it. And everything's a hypothesis until you can prove it's true or false, you know. So again, your assumptions about maybe the way a metric might be used is an assumption until you actually see it in action. And it's okay for you to play around with stuff, maybe try 2 or 3, pick the one. The key is the metric helping us make decisions? The decision might be to leave it alone. It might be saying it's on track and okay. The decision might be, look, we need to take action or whatever. But I think, because again, companies can over-engineer metrics, as you know. I mean, they can go and measure everything. There are metrics that matter, and you need to constantly keep juggling and playing around with what are we watching, what's important now. Again, if you go back to a car, do you really want to see all your tire pressures all the time, or the oil temperature? Probably not needed. There's going to be a red light will come on when there's a problem there. We just know it's being measured in the background, and that's the way you've got to think your own metrics.
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of key, related points to that that I'm really keen for you to give us your insight on. So PPX was a really interesting journey for us, trying to figure out what the profit per watt, what actually matters to us. Can you just run us through that whole concept?
Yeah. I suppose it's probably partly related to your longer term aims, because you hear the term BHAG, with big, hairy, audacious goal, but that's trademarked by Jim Collins, and he's got a model underneath it which is called the hedgehog. And all these terms, sorry guys that are listening, but all the hedgehog
just
meant
Google it.
Yeah, that's it. But all the hedgehog meant was that you've got something that protects you from others. You don't have to constantly hunt. If you get your hedgehog right, it means that your business will grow really well. You protected yourself. And leading to the BHAG were 3 factors. One is, what is our purpose? Why do we exist? You know, what are we here to do? What can we be best in world at? And what is our profit per X? And the profit per X is the X that you want to increase, that's really going to drive your growth in your business, and also the X that we want to try and make more profitable, which might include cost reduction. And ideally, your BHAG then becomes related to your profit per X. So a quick example, Naomi Simpson owns Red Balloon. People might know her from Shark Tank and elsewhere. Naomi attended one of Vern's seminars a few years back and was coming up with her BHAG. And she wanted something inspirational, and it ended up that she would love to gift, have people experience Red Balloon gifts for 10% of the Australian population. So at the time, that was 20 million people. Therefore, that was 2 million gifts she needed to give. And that worked out really well, because her profit per X was profit per gift, good experience given. So they measured that X as, so a gift might be, here's a voucher to go and fly in a balloon, or race a car, or get a bunch of flowers, whatever. So it's profit per that item. There was a caveat on that. It was in a good experience. So it had to get a high NPS score to be included. Mm-hmm. But that meant that she and her team could focus then on growing that X. And she went from took her 18 months to hit 7,000. She hit the 2 million mark in about 8.5 years. And if you go online on YouTube and search for it, you can actually see them hitting that target. So the combination of profit per X, what is the X you want to increase, and how do you make sure it's profitable, and tying that to your BHAG really drives your growth. It drives your focus. And if you haven't figured out what your profit per X is, it's well worth going through that exercise, because you might be able to comment this, Brendan. I'm sure you got some insights when you figured out your X. You started to look at the business very differently and realize there's a lot of unprofitable business we're going for, and there's profitable business. And if we focused on our X, we could really do things exceptionally well.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, but I think you have to do it. You have to understand that X before you start doing a pricing and positioning review, which should be done every 12 months anyway. But without understanding what you're trying to drive the profitability of, and understanding what you want to sell more of, you really can't understand where you fit in the market, how you drive better outcomes in the market. So that was huge for me. But I also think, tying into that, if as you touched on there, that you can also look to decrease the cost, essentially the cost of goods sold in those items. Yeah. But I think something I'm becoming kind of a good a big fan of is thinking about good profits and bad profits. Like there's long-term thinking, short-term thinking. If you have this relentless focus on the customer experience, you're going to drive good long-term profits. If you look at that PPX in the wrong way and look at, maybe the next 3 months, 6 months, the ability to, offshore staff or do something that might not be in the best interest of the customer, but does get that metric going in the right direction, you've got to have that distinction. You've got to frame all of for me, you've got to frame all of those decisions around PPX from what's going to drive an ever better experience for the customer. So there's just that balancing act to it.
There is, and businesses have to be prepared to lose customers once they know their X2, and that's very hard because if you're the owner of your business and you've grown up, or maybe in a community supporting some of the businesses around you, whatever it might be, that's a very difficult thing to do. But the customers that you bring on your journey, if they don't move with you and they don't have increased needs, or they use different tech platforms, or they're not willing to pay the cost for you to provide your service, they're really going to hamper you in delivering to everybody else, because they'll take up your time. You won't be able to create efficiency. So in fact, it makes it very difficult for you to move forward with all of those variances in there. And it might sound harsh, but you're not going to dump them. What you do is you're going to try and help them find an alternative. Do the right thing by them anyway. And I'm sure people listening out there know the customers that take up a lot of their time, give them very little return. And it's the classic 80-20 rule, 20% of your customers taking up 80% of your time. And you need to be very mindful of that. You don't need to be harsh or indifferent and be really bad and just move people on willy-nilly. But you do need to do the right thing by your business, the people in it, and all of your other customers, and figure out your X and start to structure it so it's sustainable and growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember when you came in, God knows, 2 years? I don't know when you started working with us, but time is a weird concept during these COVID years. But anyway, and you sat down and we went through the roles and responsibilities, and we did that. My recollection is there were no names. So sorry, I should clarify what the process was. But it was basically you gave us a matrix, things like marketing, sales, R&D, product support, provisioning, whatever. And then it was put your name next to it if you have complete responsibility essentially for this. Not operational input, but you own this part of the business. And my recollection is there were like 3 names on some things, 0 names on others. It was a complete mess. And my memory is that when we solved that, we enabled people within the business to really own the outcomes, trusting that they had permission to do it, but they were also, they had permission to do it, but they were also, I think through understanding that they were now aligned with that role and responsibility, that they were trusted to do what was required to drive the outcomes in that space. And I think that was probably one of the most powerful, yet simple, relatively, things that you've done with our team.
That's the FACE exercise, the function accountability chart. And look, it doesn't take the team long to do it, but it's well worth doing. And you can download the templates for free on scalingup.com. So I look for the FACE, the function accountability chart. So you're absolutely right, Brennan. A matrix, you list out the main functions of the business, and you put a name or names against it, and some are vacant. And sometimes it's just the owner of the business in most of the places, which really means that's why they're the bottleneck, why they've no time. So you got to work through and start doing it. But the key there is on the accountabilities is 2 columns to the right. One is, what are the KPIs for the role that we're measuring, that we're tracking the right way? And what are the results usually that come from a P&L or a balance sheet? So for example, if you own the sales team, you're responsible for bringing in revenue. So you might have a $5 million revenue target, for argument's sake. But conversely, in the cost side, you have $300,000 to do that. So you hire who you like in your team. And the KPIs then would be indicators to show that you're on track. So, pipeline, value of deals, sales close, whatever it might be. So between that set of metrics, you can give true accountability to the role and let that person get on, and they can do, as long as they work within those parameters, to do it. The harder thing is moving beyond the easy roles like sales and marketing, because they're metricized. Engineering's harder, porting or whatever are the other technical roles. And there's some great writing on that. There's a book which is 75 key measurements every manager must know, and that is a great starting point to look at it. But I'd really recommend someone, if you haven't done already, go through that exercise. The additional benefit of that is then that can become the starting point for hiring. Because when you go to hire, you ask questions against those KPIs and outcomes. You're not just simply saying, are you good at porting? You're going, our standard porting process is this. We expect to do 15 a day. Here are the costs that we have with that. Tell me about your experiences in doing something similar. It's a much better conversation to go, are you good at porting, or whatever the tech work is they need to do.
Yeah, clear definitions of success. Keep it specific.
Yeah.
Good advice. There is one other key thing. Well, there's a bunch of key things we haven't discussed, but one I do want to touch on because it's been a really interesting and worthwhile, but also extremely difficult thing to get our heads around is the flywheel. Can you maybe tell us, because I certainly don't know enough, can you tell us a little bit about the flywheel, why it's important, and how it's typically designed?
Yeah, look, the flywheel, profit per X comes into this. So the idea behind the flywheel is that it's like it's physical, a real physical flywheel is often hard to get going, where you got to get it moving, but its own momentum and gravity and inertia keeps it moving. And what you do is that as you keep tipping it along, it gets faster and faster. And the idea is, as a flywheel, as a process, a set of processes in your business, every time it goes round, it gets another X or 10Xs or 15Xs, whatever your profit is. So you imagine that there are probably things in your business that really drive the accumulation of Xs. So if you're an MSP, the top one might be, first of all, is who is our ideal, finding ideal customers might be the top sort of process. You work out what you do there. The next thing is, how do you get them a great quote that is compelling and they sign up? And the next bit might be, how do you onboard them and get them on a common platform? And number three would be how you service them and add more projects. And so you get these things around the flywheel. And every time that goes around, you get a great customer on, another X, another highly profitable customer. Now, that exercise is really good because then you find out where the friction points are, because just like a real flywheel, if you start putting friction against your flywheel, it starts slowing down. And so you start to figure out how you get that going around and round faster and faster. Another analogy is a snowball. So it is accumulating as it goes down the hill, it's getting bigger and bigger. And so working out your flywheel, working out what contributes, because businesses do so many things that doesn't get them any more customers and doesn't add any value for those customers. They just do lots of stuff. And really, when you get to your flywheel, you get to the heart of what drives your growth in your business, and then you'll start to figure out how you can make that flywheel go faster.
Yeah, there's been so many interesting insights from the flywheel for me. One is things that you didn't know were important. Like we have now got, as part of our flywheel, understanding our customers, which sounds basic, yeah. I know, but research wasn't something we threw a lot of money at. It wasn't something we had specific roles within the organization that would basically was their primary role within the business. That's now very much a key part of what we do. But the other part has been the ease with which now we can go to other, the mid-tier management within the business and say, here's the way that you can impact each segment of the flywheel. Here's how you can make that move faster, more efficiently, with a lower cost, and bring it back to that customer experience in each case. So that we've really found that through what we've created, and I'm sure it's not perfect, but it's again, you iterate, you keep going, but there's something there for everybody in the business to contribute to. And that makes it a lot easier to consume. Our job now is, and what I'd say for probably most people listening, if they are going to go down this path, is you've got to have continued focus to make it meaningful for the rest of the business.
Absolutely. And look, the landscape at the moment in many of your customers, Brendan, and partners in the industry is that there's a lot of consolidation starting to come. And we know even demographically that there's the whole boomer generation are going to go and retire, and businesses are going to be passed on or consolidated. So if you've got a flywheel and you're considering acquisitions or maybe merging or going acquiring someone's business in the next town, if you've got a flywheel, you can basically pour it into that, and you'll get a huge value from that acquisition, more so than if you just operate the way you currently operate and not have an understanding of where you can get more access and how you can deliver really well. So there's benefits not just to growing organically, but also through other methods.
I just want to talk strategy because there's a couple of interesting things here. One is, can you define it for us? How does a business owner understand strategy as opposed to tactics or operational things?
Yeah, you're testing my memory now to see if I remember these statements. But
I'm only asking you because I don't know.
Yeah, that's it. Look, there's a number of schools of thought, and I'm only paraphrasing it. But Porter, who's an expert in strategy, written a lot on it, says that strategy is a set of activities that differentiate you from others. Steve Jobs said it's better. It's actually don't try and be better. Try and be different. So I think part of strategy is finding out how you are different from others. When we look across many industries, they're very crowded. It's very hard to see why would I pick one ISP over another? Why would I pick one MSP? Why would I pick, one telco? Whatever it is, that is very, very difficult to distinguish. So I think strategy starts with who your ideal customer is. Who do we want to attract? For me, mine has got deeper. It's the founder operator of tech firms between 5 and 100 million in revenue. I'm very clear who my who is. So my strategy is about helping those really leverage their businesses up and dealing with them. And the set of differentiating activities I'd have to support them will be very different than maybe helping a startup who's, got 100,000 in revenue or no revenue at all. So I think you start with your customer and strategy, you define who it is, and then it's about differentiating yourself in their space. And the other part is you don't need all of a market to be really successful. There's a general rule: the 7% of any market is where 70% of the profit's made. And so for you, when you look across all your customers, you might have 100 customers. There's only 7 there that you really want. They're the most profitable ones. And your strategy has to be about finding those, getting those on board, and delivering for them. Can you imagine how much less work there is in trying to get the other 93%?
It's so important, especially when you've got finite resources, which ultimately everyone does.
Absolutely.
Except maybe some really lucky SaaS play somewhere.
Yeah.
But that again, I don't want to go on too much about our experience, but understanding who we were trying to sell to, particularly in our New Zealand consumer space, where we only have so many seats to sell, taking the plane analogy, really helped us understand the messaging around the target. And so love that. And I guess when it comes to strategy then, so we've defined it there, someone has to own it within a business, right? Like someone has to coordinate everyone.
Yeah.
For us, that's our Chief Operating Officer, Scott, who has done a great job of that, continues to do a great job of that. How do you typically identify who should own that within a business?
Usually operational people are very good at owning the people that get it done, that are great at getting people together. They don't necessarily have to come up with the strategy itself, but if they can help coordinate it, it helps they have an understanding. But the main thing is someone owns it. And ideally, you set up a strategy council. Now, that might sound like overkill for a small business, but it might only be 2 or 3 people that are not necessarily senior people in the business. They're just good at thinking. And you set some ground rules. For example, you're not looking at anything operational in your strategy. So it's not about the next 12 months. That's to do with your budgeting and the way that you just run your business normally. It has to be 12 months and beyond. And ideally, you get a bunch of tools, just like a good craftsman would have a special, coping saw for cutting out certain types of joints, or bandsaw for other purposes. There are tools for strategy that you use. So what you need to do is decide on what's the minimum we need to do to have a strategy in the first place that you can iterate off, get those basics done, continually work in that. But the idea of a council is meet maybe once a month or once every couple of weeks for an hour. You talk nothing operational, only talk about strategy in the future, and start to get these things in place. So you don't need to do a huge amount of work. It just needs to be consistent. Now, for smaller businesses out there who may just have the owner doing that, you might think most of my people, they wouldn't know it's strategy. They'd have hit them on the head. I still would be tempted to invite a few in that are willing to maybe share a beer or a pizza with you while you just discuss this stuff. And the last thing I'd say about strategy is make sure you've done some persona work as well beforehand, that you have defined your customers. And in some ways, those personas need to be sitting in a room with you. So I'd have my persona for who that founder operator is. And I'd be thinking about, well, what does this strategy piece mean to them? Would they like this? Would they hate it? And so on. So they actually become like another person within that council.
That's a good idea there. You've made me think there too, that in our strategy council sessions, we may have lost that focus a little bit, if I'm honest, on that 12 months out. It's so easy to come back to, what about this quarter? What about next quarter? Because but if you really segment that space and just, it's a strategy only session, it's a big picture in the future. Where are we heading? Yeah. So it's something for me to take back.
Yeah. To add to that, Brent, I mean, I heard I saw an interview with Jeff Bezos a couple of years back, and they were talking about the fantastic quarter that Amazon had and growth and the rest, and saying, you're looking really good this year. And they said, what you got planned for the rest of the year? And he said, I've no idea. I'm only thinking about 3 years and beyond. That was it.
Great quote.
Yeah. And we've got to learn how to think about our businesses like that. We always overestimate what we do in the short term and underestimate what we do in the long term. And we don't do enough thinking mid to long term.
Do you think COVID's sort of exacerbated that, where it's so hard to kind of look past kind of the immediate smoke, basically?
Yeah, no, look, it has. But in some ways, it's gifted us back a bit of time and capacity. We what we might lose, say, in that we might have lost in contact with customers, we're getting connected in other ways. And we also don't take the opportunity to talk to our customers enough as part of our strategy process. So while COVID certainly derailed that, we don't, everything from supply chain issues and staff being out and being sick and the rest, there's an awful lot happened. We need to be thinking about strategy all the time. And I mentioned, in the past, the 4 key questions you should be asking customers at least once a week. Each, if you've got a few executives or senior people, are, how are you doing? How's your business? What's happening in your industry? What are our competitors up to that you've seen? And how can we do better? People consistently asking that will get an awful lot to input into their strategy. So even if you don't have the time to formally set up a council, take separate time out of strategy, get used to asking the same questions from your customers across the business and collect that, and that will drive your strategy.
The last time I think I caught up with you, you asked us as a group, what are the 4 key questions? No one knew. So when you told us those last time, I wrote them down in my notebook, and now I look at them all the time. So got there in the end. Just last thing on the Strategy Council session, I did a bit of a presentation on some of the work we've done with you to date at the CEO Institute here on the Gold Coast. And one of the questions I got afterwards was, well, how do you maintain focus on this stuff? How do you make sure it isn't just sort of said once, chucked on a wall or whatever in a SharePoint doc somewhere and moved on? And I just said, Strategy Council, you've got to keep meeting. You've got to set time. You've got to have someone who owns it, who coordinates it. And obviously, before any of that happens, you got to sort of define what you're working towards. But huge there. Now, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions to finish off. You also do quite a lot of individual executive coaching. I guess I wanted to ask, what are the biggest themes you come across in that coaching, and that when resolved, the things that drive the biggest gains for both individuals and businesses? Hopefully that's not too vague a question.
No, it's not. Look, first up, I'm not a trained executive coach. The reason I do it is because I think it's part and parcel of business coaching. You have to work with executives and the problems they encounter. So I come more from the background of experience in doing that. And so what seems to crop up a lot is, while CEOs and leaders may look like they're confident, often they're really not sure what they're doing or where they're going. And that comes up very frequently. they've
Good,
also,
it's not just me.
It's not just you, Brendan. But they did, and for lots of reasons. You know, we could get into the whole psychology of why they've chosen to be leader too. You know, weren't in love as a child, dropped in their head, whatever it might be. But
both in my case. Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is they're unsure, and part of the process is just assuring people, no, you know what, that's perfectly normal. You know, those situations, or dealing or learning the hard way. I like learners. I like executives that are learners. I don't think we should go around and reinventing ourselves. And smart technical people, or professionals in general, believe that they are smart enough to figure everything out themselves. And they really get themselves in a bind. It's very myopic thinking. And so again, on that side, what I see is when people start to learn how to learn, and the value of using existing models to save them time and do it and experiment, they get a lot of relief from that, because they don't need to be the smartest person in the room all the time. They can use others' expertise. And I think they're also, in many cases, over helpful. They're very, you know, leaders are very open people. So they tend to go, you know, my door's open anytime, call me anytime, I'll help you with anything. So what are people going to do? They're going to do that, you know. So even if they could figure it out themselves, I know, oh, Brendan said come in anytime. Brendan, you know, what time does the cafe down the road open at? Questions right through to very difficult technical. So I think, you know, it's learning how an executive or a leader can start to empower their own team and own people, frees up most of their time and their capacity to be better in their own role. And that's hard to do. They got to realize being a good guy or a good person is not a prerequisite. In fact, what you've got to do is manage very carefully your time and what you expose people to, and help them get better themselves.
Yeah, and that empowering others doesn't diminish your value. No. In fact, it increases it, because it frees you up to be more strategic and bigger picture. Yeah. That's really, really good advice, good insight. Last question for you, 2022, what are we, a month in? Anything you're seeing, any predictions, any particular themes emerging, whether it's in the tech space generally or business community in a wider sense?
Yeah, look, it's hard to tell with the current outbreak, where we might get more variances, and so there's going to be fluctuations of, you know, cases and the rest. So putting that aside, globally, there's been things like supply chain issues. They will start to sort themselves out, because business and governments are smart enough to start figuring out those bottlenecks. So I think that'll start to free up middle of the year. Interest rates rising this year is going to have an impact on tech company valuations, and therefore potentially investing in that space. But the path to digitization means that a lot of the businesses that you would deal with and support are going to continue to get a lot of work. But I think there's going to be a few trends over this year in the economics related to many of the tech businesses and MSPs and the rest. There potentially will be consolidation because of that. You know, people going, well, maybe it's my last time to sell my business, or buy someone else, because I might be able to get the funds. So I think that might start happening mid to late year on there. Regarding the use of tech, I don't know if you saw last year, there's some exciting stuff now coming up around new TVs and new sound-based systems. I don't think a lot of the stuff is going to flow into business much this year. I don't think we're going to get any new technology arriving on the scene this year. Though there will be a move a lot to more automation and AI. You know, that's definitely on the cards. And I can see there's been a rise in the number of people undertaking AI-based short and other courses to try and get an understanding of how that's going to happen. And I think that will be a trend this year.
Good stuff. All right. Now, you are not a man that needs to plug himself. If anything, you're pulling back from working because you can, and you've done extremely well. Is there any, or are there any projects that you're currently working on that you want to plug while we're talking?
Look, I suppose One thing I've been doing the coaching for a long time. And as you know, Brendan, I own a number of business, co-own a number of business too. So that keeps me busy there. But what I've seen though is CEOs and entrepreneurs burning out as such, or maybe achieving success at a cost. And so what I'm hoping to do is, as I wind down through the middle of this year, is go back and research more around that aspect. And again, it's probably aligned to 20 Mile March, is going, what is enough for an entrepreneur? How do they design a business so they actually have a life? A couple of good readings I did over the Christmas period. One was called The End of Burnout, written by a professor of literature, actually, who burned himself out. And he talked a lot about the work cultures that we have, why we're driven to be successful. But if you're going to grow a business, why would you do it if your life is not going to be any better at the end of it? So I think that's my next journey, Brendan, is really working on that without making it too subjective. This is not getting into touchy-feely space. You know, this is pragmatic. It's about going, why would I design my business a certain way so I can have a life and my business is a great business and the people working in it are really enjoying what they're doing? So that
sounds really interesting. When you're ready and you're looking for some prototypes, I can do an introduction to a couple of people who would very much benefit from having a chat in that regard.
That's great.
Okay, look, we'll wrap it up there. I just want to say thanks again for coming in. Really appreciate you giving your time, your insights. It's always great to catch up. I'm sure I will talk again under the guise of a Lightwire strategy session in the near future.
That's great. Now, lovely to be here, Brennan, and good luck to all your audience out there. I wish you the very best for this coming year.
Thanks, Paul. Right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, or watching now that we've got the video working on Spotify. And of course, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can. Brendan Ritchie, Ritchie. Paul O'Dwyer is also on LinkedIn and is worth a follow. Thanks again. See you soon.